Now, if you're new to kiting, you may be wondering about exactly what sort of line set you're going to need to fly various kites. And in this video, we're going to do our very best to explain it. What we're looking at here is our line of choice. It's LaserPro. LaserPro is a Spectra line. Some of the common lines that you'll find are made of Spectra. You'll also find Dyneema, which is a slightly more budget-friendly, slightly stretchier, kind of similar thing to Spectra. In the old days, and once in a while, you can find Kevlar, same thing they use in bulletproof vests, tends to be much more abrasive, very strong, but not as slippery. And then the other one is Dacron at the very most inexpensive range. Dacron tends to be quite elastic, so when you go to make an input, it stretches quite a bit. So Spectra, what's great about it is that it has a very low stretch rate, and there's two facets to line that you're going to find. One is the actual stretch, which is the elasticity. That's once the line is settled, how much does it stretch and then return? So again, Spectra has very low stretch, and it also has very low creep. And creep is if you had a piece of string that started at 100 feet, but after you used it for a while, it was 101 feet. That's the creep. So it's a permanent stretching that happens to any line over time. But again, the great thing about Spectra and LaserPro Gold in particular is it has very low stretch and very low creep. So what we're looking at here in this video is 50 pound on the far left. 50 pound is the ideal light wind line. A very strong axle hit or a strong gust can potentially break 50 pound, but 50 pound is phenomenal for light wind because it is so light, it offers so little wind resistance, and it tends to have a very direct connection to the kite. Next on that line, second from the left, is your 90 pound. Now, 90 pound is the most ubiquitous weight of line used, I think, by most sport kite flyers in the world, particularly for quad line. When you're flying quad line, you're pretty much going to be on 90 pound all the time if you're flying on one of the most popular shapes. 90 pound is the most common team length or team weight, and just generally the most universal. Now, third from the left is 150 pound. 150 pound you don't often see with quad line unless you're flying a style of design that tends to pull more than the most popular shapes, and very useful for dual line. However, some of the dual line kites tend to generate quite a bit of power and pressure. Now, fourth from the left or second from the right, we're on to 200 pound line. 200 is really, that's a high wind line. So the 150 is kind of a high medium for dual line, and then 200 pound, you'll rarely, if ever, see that on a quad line. But on dual line, there are definitely wind ranges where that weight comes in handy. And then, of course, on the far right, we have 300 pound. 300 pound is really more ideal for power kites, and if you're flying team, things like that. So it's not uncommon for dual line teams to have full sets of 300, 200, 150, and 90 pound. They generally don't buy 50 pound because of its proclivity to being cut by the impact of another wingtip. The 300 pound that's the heaviest that we carry, but you'll also see up to 500 pound available out there in the market. So these are the different weights. The other considerations about weight is the actual literally the weight of the line, not just the strength or the pound test, which is how we refer to as the weight, but also the physical weight of the line itself and how it hangs or drags or otherwise puts some sort of dynamic into the input on the kite. So, you know, if you're flying a 500 pound line in light wind, you're going to see these drooping lines behind the kite because there's not enough power in the sail or tension to keep them quite tight. So for a quad line flyer, typically you're going to carry, you know, once you really get into it, you're generally going to have 50 pound and 90 pound sets in different lengths, which I'll talk about in the next clip. For dual line, I myself, I carry 50 pound, 90 pound, 150 pound, 200 pound, and although I rarely use it except for team, 300 pound. So this is the breakdown of the weights. Let's go ahead and take a look at the different lengths and how that comes into play when selecting a line set. Now, when it comes to selecting a length of line for your kite, it will, of course, vary somewhat depending on whether or not you're looking at a dual line or a quad line kite. But the universal aspects of that is the first line would be the wind window. The wind window is, of course, the amount of space that the kite has to fly through the window. So when you have short lines, the wind window, because you can see here as I go through this, the kite in this example is going to stay the same size. But as you fly on very short lines, you tend to hit the walls pretty quick. So you're making the same size turns. The kite in theory is traveling at the same speed, but the space or the radius in which you have to operate is fairly small. So 30 foot is usually where we start out at for quad line kites. I think 50 foot is probably the short range for the shortest range effectively for dual line because of the non-hovering dynamic of that kite. 30 foot also allows you to do things like pull the kite out of the air and interact with it with your hands and then get it back out to the end of the lines. You can find this under 3D or catch and throw techniques with the quad line kite. Now, as you get out to, let's say, 75 foot line now, you're going to start to see a bit more travel path available to you, just like this. Now, this length is going to allow you a little bit more flexibility for maneuvers. If you wanted to fly squares or various shapes, things of that nature, that's where I would say anywhere between 75 and 100 foot. That's kind of a middle length that's pretty common. That gives you a really nice direct connection with the kite, but doesn't take up too much room and doesn't necessarily start to create too much line drag on the kite. Now, as we get out to 120 foot or even 140, 150 foot, that's where we're starting to get a much bigger wind window. So the range that the kite can fly off of that pivot point gets quite a bit larger. And where you'll see those lengths come into play mostly is for team flying. Team flying, of course, you're putting more kites in the air. You're flying bigger, more complex maneuvers. So you want a little bit more space in the sky. And then particularly if you're a carver, if you're the sort of pilot who really enjoys doing a lot of recognizable shapes that are connected together, that's where long lines will really come into play. And then the speedy trick flyers, they'll tend to favor back down towards the 75 to 50 foot range on average, and then also around 100 foot. So now some of the other dynamics with line length. The shorter your lines, the more direct line tension you're going to have with the kite. So in part, it's going to give you a really strong connection, a sense of connection with the kite. And you're going to have very little wind drag. As you get out longer on those lines, you're going to start to feel just a little bit of, there's kind of a sense of lag. I don't want to say it exactly in those terms, but the longer lines, it just provides a little bit more sort of length in the range of motion, and it's not quite so jumpy. But the caveat is that when you're on much longer lines, what you'll experience is that sometimes the lines, because you have a lot more line there, relative to the actual physical weight of the line, its weight on a scale, and its thickness, you're going to start to experience more line drag, more droop. The kite is going to have to start carrying those lines around, and that becomes more of a factor the longer the lines get. So there's a balance that you'll walk between the weight, the actual weight and thickness of the line, and the length of the line, so that you end up with a nice balance for what it is that you're out to do. So with that covers our radius. I'm going to go ahead and step out and just give a basic summary of some of the other facets of selecting line sets, and we'll let you go to it. Now, as we specialize mostly in quad line kites, I'm going to go ahead and focus on those line sets from our offering. The 50-pound quad line, 75-foot, this is a really ideal set for folks who are flying in light wind. You have the benefit of the 50-pound line, which is quite light, and a relatively short length of 75 feet, so you don't get too much drag. But 75 feet is still long enough that you have a pretty enjoyable wind window in which to play and create shapes. All around, I found this to be the overall best balance for light wind flying. The caveat, of course, is that 50 pound, if you're getting gusts or you want to be able to fly in higher wind, 50 pound just at a certain point simply is not strong enough to support it. So having covered that, we'll pop on over to the first 90-pound set that we're dealing with. So 90-pound quad line, 30 foot. 30 foot, again, as I described earlier, is really more of an urban length. Urban in that you can fly in very surprisingly small spaces because it is indeed only 30 foot long. You can do your catch and throw maneuvers. You can pull it out of the air, catch it, throw it back out to the end of the lines. You don't have a lot of line to get tangled up. And all around, it's just very dynamic. This is probably not the ideal length to learn quad line on, but man, once you have a certain sense of how the kite operates and you're starting to get the hang of it, 30 pound is a pretty wonderful set. I usually have a set connected to a kite in the back of my car at all times so that I can just pop a kite out and fly and have a really, really good time. So that's our 30 foot, 90 pound. Now we're going on to our 90 pound, 75 foot. This is what I would say is probably the most familiar length for folks that are starting in quad line. Because 75 foot, again, just like with the 50 pound, it's long enough to have a good wind window to learn to play in, but it's not so long that you're getting a bunch of line drag. And it just really universally, it's a pretty solid length of line to play with. The only thing is if you are flying where other quad line flyers are, they're almost all going to be on 120 foot lines, and these simply won't be compatible. You won't be able to fly with them typically unless they're all on 75 foot too. An exception to that rule would be an event like Kite Party in Huntington Beach, where 75 foot is the maximum length that pilots are allowed to use just so that people can share the field actively. So 90 pounds, 75 foot. That takes us on to the 90 pound, 100 foot. I would say that this is probably my least used line set myself as a flying professional and performer, except at a location like Cervia, Italy, where the size of the field is really a little too small in most cases for teams to fly in 120 feet. So the 100 foot really comes into play. But compared to the 75 foot, it gives you a little bit longer line set, a little bit bigger wind window. When you're at the very top, it takes you longer to hit the bottom or hit the sides. So 100 foot has its place. And then last but not least, in the quad line range, of course, we have our 90 pound by 120 foot. This is the international team standard approximately. It varies slightly depending on conversion from feet to meters. But 120 foot is what the last 3 world records for team flies have been set at. We had 64 kites up one year, and then we had 81 kites up, and then finally 101 kites and pilots in formation in 2019. Every single pilot was on roughly 120 feet. Again, that varies somewhat depending on where they've come from, where they've got their lines, but that's what they're working with. So 90 pound, 120 foot. This is what I use the most because, frankly, I just like the social aspect of quad line flying and being able to interact with other kite flyers in the air and be at the same length with them and play. So that is a general look at what I'm usually carrying for quad lines right there. The other things that I'll offer is that line set wear and tear. I think for an average recreational flyer, any given line set is going to last at least a couple of years, and in most cases longer than that. The difference now is if you are a flyer that is normally on grass fields, not particularly dusty, the lines aren't getting super dirty, and it's not especially wet while you fly, then these beautiful slippery lines just keep on slipping and sliding, and there's not very much abrasion except the lines themselves moving against each other, and so they last a very, very long time. Now, if you start flying in, say, a dust bowl, you're in a like a desert environment. I'm not talking about bumping into rocks and things like that, because that, of course, can nick or impact the line, but just general wear and tear. If you're in a dusty environment, the dust is, of course, getting on the lines, and then that dust is part of the sliding process as the lines wrap around each other and then slide through that wrap. It's, of course, going to make more friction and wear them down faster. And then I think usually what I found is that the fastest wear and tear that you're going to find is on some of the coastal areas, the sand beaches, particularly when you're dealing with high metal, like in Long Beach, Washington, where I fly. There's a lot of iron. That's why our sand is quite dark, and it tends to be fairly abrasive on lines. For myself, since I fly regularly, and I'm usually flying a lot of team, which means my lines are not only rubbing together, they're also rubbing together with other kite flyers' lines, and then it also has that iron-based sand. It tends to wear down a bit. Now, at my level of flying, my frequency and the aggression that I use in my kites, I'm using probably 2 of these a year, anywhere from 2 to 3 sets per year. But I think an average pilot, unless something unusual happens where it gets cut and taken out of the air, they're going to get a year, maybe sometimes 2 years of flying out of this, maybe more, even if you're not flying every single full weekend and rubbing up against other pilots. So line wear is always something to take into consideration. Again, LaserPro is a phenomenal product, tends to be very, very durable in any reasonable conditions. My main point here was just to illustrate that it can vary depending on the sort of environments that you're flying in. So that has covered our different line weights, the different lengths, and how that affects your wind window and some of the light wind applications of that. And then, of course, we've looked at exactly what we have available here in quad line sets. We also have a full range of dual line sets, hand-tied, with a significant amount of care. Even myself, as an active professional pilot, when I need lines, I just pull them right off the shelf. So everything that we offer, everything that we sell is exactly what I make for myself. And then I'm pulling out of that same pool. I don't have special set-asides. I'm using exactly what you guys are using. So with that, there's pretty much a thorough introduction to, again, weights, lengths, beautiful LaserPro Gold. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us through our Facebook channel or email, or call us up. And in the meantime, have fun and enjoy your kiting experience.